Welcome to Making the Cut podcast with Chris Hill and Sean Winter, where we help you succeed in life and business by sharing principles and strategies that guide some of the most successful people in the world.
Welcome to episode 16 of the Making the Cut podcast. I'm Chris Hill, my co-host Sean Winter. Well, we're connecting with Scott Stratten today, and I think a lot of the folks out there could really benefit from hearing his message on marketing and branding and advertising.
Yeah, absolutely. He talks about branding, marketing, connecting with audiences, and even millennials. Right? And that one always gets under my skin, the way that people refer to millennials, and I know he's got some funny points about that too.
Yeah, I've heard some of his keynotes. He actually had a video that went viral on Facebook, 13, 14, maybe 15 million views. I don't know if you've seen it or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's funny. I don't know if it was that one or another one when he says, when people say millennials, what they mean are people younger than us that we don't like. And then I think on one of them he said, he asked how old everybody was in the audience. And once he found that group that fit into the millennial generation, he said, so they're already in the room with us. And he said, let's communicate through landlines or record it on tape and let's listen to it on our Walkman. And he makes a reference like, they're looking around, they have no idea what we're talking about. See?
Yeah, man, dude, he's a funny guy. He's I'm looking forward to it. For anyone listening, definitely stay tuned because I'm sure he'll drop some funny bombs throughout the show. And for anyone, if you don't know who Scott Stratten is, he's actually been named by Forbes as one of the top 5 social media influencers in the world. He's the president of UnMarketing, and he's the author of several best-selling books on sales and marketing. His 5th book is coming out in the fall, which is going to be called UnBranding. And he's worked with huge companies, done keynotes, now does them exclusively for a living with folks like PepsiCo and Adobe, Red Cross, Hard Rock Cafe, Cirque du Soleil, Saks Fifth Avenue, Deloitte, and the list goes on. He's a really intelligent guy, really funny guy, and I think he's got a great perspective on brand building, marketing for the restaurant industry, for hospitality, but I think just across the board. So what do you say, Sean? Jump in?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Well, Mr. Scott Stratten, how are you, sir?
I am doing wonderful. I've gotten some surgery on my vocal cords to make my voice lower, so I can automatically update my fees.
Good to hear, man. Well, it's great to connect. We've been connected for a while now. I'm a big fan of your work. I think it speaks to a lot of what I preach, and at the same time, you're way funnier. So that's something you got going for you.
Yeah, but I can't cook, so you win.
Well, thank you, sir. How about just a little bit of a quick background on yourself back from the bubble wrap days to where you are now?
Yeah, well, this is kind of like I live my dream now as a keynote speaker, and it's all I do. And I'm a 22-year overnight success doing it. I really started out, and my passion was in the music industry. Originally, I was, in a band in high school. I was the lead singer of a heavy metal band. I'm throwing up the devil horns right now. And then I realized that wasn't going to cut it. I wasn't exactly at the upper echelon of singing talent. But then I saw this big gap, and there was a want. And that's what business is, right? You find a gap and fill it. And I knew I had a skill set for business. I've been an entrepreneur since I was 12 and always doing that. And I realized musicians were great at their art, but terrible at business. And I realized there was a spot there. And so I did that. And on this, that was on the side. And I went through the classical, went to college, got my business diploma in human resources, worked in HR at Goodwill Toronto. And then I literally got a job as a sales training manager. I flew around North America training people how to sell bubble wrap. Like, you got to listen to that. That's a heck of a job right there. I flew around training people how to sell air. Right? 2 years, man. You think you can BS? Come on. Like, I had to, not only did I teach them how to sell air, I had to teach them how to sell air and convince customers that our air was better than somebody else's air. Like that was a trip. And then, my career of working for somebody lasted a total of 4 years after college. And I realized entrepreneur, I think, is Latin for terrible employee. Like I couldn't do it. I couldn't, I don't know how to word this right. I couldn't play the game, if that makes sense. I can't play politics at work. I can't do that pecking order thing. I can't do any of those things. It's just not in my nature. And then so I went to the president of the company, the packaging company, and my son was about to be born, and I said, I can't. This is 15, 16 years ago now. I said, I can't travel around North America over weekends and everything else and come into the office 40 hours a week. It makes no sense. So I said, I'll work from home and then I'll go travel and keep traveling. And he said, we're not ready for that. And I'm like, well, I'm not ready for you. And I walked out and I had 65 cents in the bank, and because that was smart. And I just knew I couldn't do it, though. I didn't want to do it that way. And then it just happened that I started building UnMarketing. And I wanted to build it. I wanted to create UnMarketing because I thought there was a better way. And I all the marketing that was being taught back then was interruptive marketing, stuffing your message in front of people's faces to the point where it's almost to submission, where they're saying, fine, I'll buy from you because you've beaten me down so much. And I knew there was a different way. And back then there was no social media. There was barely the internet. It was being used by us fellow geeks mostly. And people were wondering if they should be on the internet or not. And just so happens when social media and everything blew up in 2008, 2009, I was kind of at the forefront of it. So got the first book deal, built a platform, got really loud. Then publishers want a piece of that. And we're now in the midst, like today, we're finishing writing UnBranding, which is the 5th book, and that'll come out in October. And through all of this, by the way, I have the best social media ROI in history. That's where I met my wife, Alison, and she's a co-author of the book, she's a co-owner of the company with me, the co-host of our UnPodcast, and the greatest thing that's happened. So I win the title.
Now, when you were starting out, you obviously were passionate about what you were doing. You wouldn't be doing it 15, 16 years later now. So did you kind of struggle a little bit to kind of find your place and find your confidence to start pursuing this passion, convert it into a business, create some sort of pricing strategy that you felt you were worth whatever dollar amount you were placing on your passion? Can you talk a little bit about that?
For sure. I certainly have never lacked confidence. I'm one of those rare speakers that doesn't get nervous before getting on stage. And I've never gotten nervous. Even back from my lead singing days, I would not get nervous before a show. And I think that might be a mental issue. Like I might be missing a synapse in my brain or something that says, wet your pants before you go on stage. And I had somebody once say to a group of speakers, like, if you're not getting nervous before you go up there, you're not trying hard enough. And I'm like, pardon me, I'm not on purpose not getting nervous. I just don't. I feel like I was meant to be there. And that can be singing at a crowd at a high school to speaking in front of 8,000 people in a keynote. I'm just like, this is where I was meant to be. And I knew I wanted to be here since I was 12. I knew I wanted to stand on stage and speak. And when I saw a Les Brown video on TV from a PBS station in Buffalo, New York, and we live just outside of Toronto in Ontario, and they were doing a pledge drive. And they said, if you pledge something like $37, we would send you the VHS tape of Les Brown's talk. And here it is. And they showed it. And I just watched him and I was mesmerized. And I'm like, people can do that for a living? That's a thing? And so I'm like, that's what I want to do. And now at 42 years old, this is what I've done solely for the past 7 years. And the problem is, like any business, I can address the things that I didn't have confidence on, which was things like pricing. Pricing is a struggle, I think, for everybody. And especially in my world where, I started the two worst worlds to price in is consulting and speaking, because there's no price list. There's no rate sheet. There's no, well, if you're this consultant, you charge $200 an hour. If you're a speaker, you charge $1,200 a talk or whatever it is. We just made it up. And I'm still making it up today. Whenever I say my price, even when I started, when I was doing consulting, I remember one guy, I'm like, we used to do website audits, and we'd go over people's sites and show them where the strengths and weaknesses were. And I charged, I think, $500 for it. And he was local. So we met in a coffee shop and I went over all of it with him. And at the end of it, he's like, that was awesome. And he looks at me and goes, you're way too cheap. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, well, then we should double my fee. And he's like, no, you're not doing that now. I'm just telling you, you're way too cheap. Because one of the problems with pricing things is pricing also comes under perception. So when I see something that costs more, depending on the situation, but mostly if I see something that costs more, I think it's better. And there's different types of people in this world. There's the bargain shoppers. And that's for any business, by the way. There's bargain shoppers for somebody shopping at Walmart, somebody going out for dinner, for somebody. And then there's the people who are price sensitive, yet they know if it's more expensive, they want to do it. And then there's the elitist pricing people where if it doesn't cost a lot of money, I'm probably not going to buy it. And I've gone through all that just as somebody who goes out and eats somewhere. Alison and I go to Vegas. We eat at Nobu. We eat at the nice places because we have 5 children at home and we don't eat here. It's only us going out, and that's when we'll spend the time and the money. And I take an example now as a keynote speaker now, after 350 keynotes in 7 years, I now make, not then, but I now make $20,000 a keynote. And if somebody put me in front of a meeting planner, if you guys were booking an event, let's say you guys were going to do an event for chefs and restaurant owners, and it was going to be a thing in New York, and you're going to have 1,000 people there, and you had a budget, and somebody said to you, okay, we have 2 speakers for you. Speaker A is $2,000, and he'll pay for his own travel. And speaker B is Scott, who's $20,000 plus $2,000 airfare because he flies business class and a hotel. By knee-jerk reaction, who do you think is the better quality speaker?
20,000.
No question.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. Now, mind you, if you don't have the budget, then it's irrelevant. But there is a pricing perception thing, and I always try to keep that in mind. And I always buckle when I used to pitch the price back when I started speaking. I'm like, well, it's $2,500 for speaking, and they're like, great, and I'm like, damn it, I mean $2,500 deposit. Like I just when they say yes too quickly, there's a problem. And I certainly don't like leaving money on the table, but I also have to have a comfort zone. And if you can believe it, and the obscene amount I make for a keynote, if you can believe, a lot of people told me that's underpriced. And I just can't fathom charging more than that right now until my head gets a little bigger. But that's just simply, people say, well, how are you worth that? I'm like, at the end, the market dictates what it can pay. Like I could say I'm $1 million speaker, $1 million for a keynote, and I would never speak. But I could say that's my price. Your price is what people pay for something. That's what it comes down to. But it's still today is the hardest thing for me and most people I talk to do is to pick and set a price.
Well, and I think, Scott, you do a great job of differentiating yourself. I mean, I would think one of the elite speakers out there because of the fact that you're not only, smart intellectually, but you're entertaining and funny, and even every now and then fall off the stage, right?
Fall off one stage and that's it, right? Now
that was recently, right?
Was it 2 months ago? Dude, I just bailed like a penguin jumping off the iceberg. It was just brutal. Man, 350 talks, and then it happens, right? And now, of course, I love it so much. I have like an animated GIF of it in the video, and it was pretty epic. I'm lucky I have the man bun because I think it absorbs some of the fall. But straight off my back, right, too, like flat on my back. It was just, there was no way to recover from that.
Well, as Les Brown says, if you can look up, you can get up.
Boom! My man, not a boy.
So Scott, question: as you're maybe giving keynotes and talking to different brands and maybe consulting with them, just to kind of start out, where do brands start in relation to creating either a brand strategy or a marketing strategy for themselves these days?
Well, different places are obviously at different points in that. Yeah, awareness is a big part of everything. And if I don't know your brand exists, that's, I think, is the hardest thing to do in business. And you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but just building initial awareness. I don't care if it's a restaurant, a consulting company, a real estate firm, a chiropractor, whatever. Just getting the market to know you're there and recognize you're there, not just, plaster flyers everywhere, but understand that if I need a accountant, you're the one I think of. That's the hardest thing to do. That's the one that is the biggest uphill climb. And you have a different set of circumstances and restrictions and opportunities if you're a known brand, just like if you're a known restaurant. One of the reasons why the franchise model works so well in the food service industry is because you instantly buy awareness and brand recognition, because, it's really the hardest thing, I think, to build, because it takes time. And unless you have a lot of money and to get that word out there, but it's still not the same type of word, then it's just advertising. So word of mouth is the greatest thing in history, and it takes so freaking long at the start. So that's a challenge for that segment of companies. It's a struggle because do you have enough money to last until that momentum kicks in? And nobody knows when that momentum will kick in, and sometimes it won't, depending on how good your business is. Like, I had somebody write to us last year and said, "Can you help my buddy out? He opened a high-end burger joint in California, and he's getting killed on Yelp. Can you help him out? Give him some advice." And I'm like, "Well, what are people complaining about?" And he said, they're complaining about price, service, and food quality. Everything. And I'm like, so why don't you just close the business? Just close it down. Just shut it down. I'm like, you don't have a Yelp problem. You have a business problem. And, that's another side of it too, right? Where sometimes you don't want that larger awareness of your brand until you've worked the kinks out, until you've got it into a nice, wonderful, free-flowing system. And, I don't think I want, and again, I'm speaking from this place of ignorance because I don't run a restaurant. I've only ever worked in a couple as a busboy and a waiter. But my opening night, I want it filled, but I also don't want it filled because I want to make sure everything works okay and goes through the motions and we're all in a well-oiled machine. I don't want the gears cracking against each other right away, because it's that first impression. And that's why you do soft openings. That's why you get people to come beforehand. And I just think that what people don't realize, though, I think, is that different industries are also the same. There's a lot of the same challenges and how much we can learn from other industries, but we put blinders on and don't look at it and think, well, we're different. As I give you an example. So I do usually a pre-conference call before every keynote I'm going to do at a conference. And it's the same call every time. And they're going to tell me the audience size and who's in the audience and their goals and their theme. And it's the same thing each time. And they open with, "We saw you at this event before and we loved it, but our audience is different." Every time. They say that every time. They're like, "Can you do this?" And I'm like, "Of course." And then I do pretty much the same talk. And they love it because we all as humans have the same constraints and roadblocks and things like that. And I think that is one of the ways we have to realize that we're not as isolated as we think, that I think learning outside of our own bubble is important. Learning from peers and industries and best practices and benchmarks, of course, is very important in the industry, but also just jump in another pool for a bit and see what's going on, because I think some of the best inspirations are from ones who have an outside, fresh perspective.
Oh, and Scott, it seems like UnMarketing, a lot of the content that you guys put out there is not, about yourself. It's not your blog posts and things of that nature, but it's essentially like a compilation of case studies on marketing, branding, PR.
Right.
One that's been in the news recently that I know you've had a field day over is the United debacle.
It's like my birthday. It's wonderful.
What's going on there?
I just think you get to a boiling point, and we've been on this boiling, right around the right degree of boiling when it comes to airlines in a while. And I fly a lot. I'm a diamond, adamantanium, Corinthian flyer on multiple airlines and hundreds of thousands of miles a year. And I get it. It's just they've been squeezing and squeezing and squeezing. And to the point, right, they put on all these fuel surcharges a couple years ago because of oil prices. And the oil prices went down and they never took the fuel surcharge off. They make billions from that. Then there's the check bag fees. And then they're making billions from that. And then they're changing the loyalty programs. And they're making billions from their loyalty programs, selling it to banks. And they cut down what flights you can go on, the mileage numbers you need to go up. And all of these things. Plus, we've given almost absolute power to flight attendants on flights that you say one wrong thing and they can chuck you off. And all of these, at the end of the day, come to this boiling point. And then we drag a mother flipping person off a flight. And it's just like, baboof. And this is where it just gets to that point where we're just playing Twisted Sister in the background. We're not going to take it. And they've always been terrible. This wasn't like, oh, they're bad now? What happened? Like the brand of United, though, with people who fly a lot like myself, we know United is terrible. Like when I saw this story originally, my reaction was, oh, I could see that happening. Like it wasn't shock. It wasn't like, what? It was United. Oh yeah. No, they almost wanted to drag me off a couple planes. Like that was like, if it was Southwest or up here, if it was WestJet, brands that are known to be customer focused, then I would be like, oh, yeah, that's weird. That's not like them. But we have this idea, like, I don't know, people have too many great airline stories. I know I don't. And we write books on these things. And it's just like, you're known as a couple of, so Emirates is known as great. WestJet's known as great. Southwest is known as great. Virgin Airlines is known as great. Like that's almost the whole world right there, what airlines are great in the world. And that's what branding is, right? When you say United before this event, you'd say, I was okay until the merger with Continental, now it's blah. And then now when I say United, people think somebody being dragged off a plane. That's branding. That's simply what branding is. There's no argument. You can't be wrong with the brand definition you feel a company is. But I was very ecstatic when this came out. It gives us so much content for so long. It's glorious. It's just glorious. And that's why we'll never run out of content for our show and for the talks and for the books. It's like there's never I just rely on humans to give me content. And as long as they're in charge, it's wonderful.
And Scott, talking about branding, I'll paraphrase, but you said something along the lines that people remember the most recent or extreme experience. Is that correct? Can you talk about that so that people can really understand that principle?
Yeah, psychologists say when we see a logo, we think of two things. We think of our most recent experience with the brand or one we've heard, and our most extreme experience with the brand or one we've heard. So if we take the example of United, I think of the last time I flew on them, and I think about the guy being dragged off the plane. That's simply what branding is. And so if you own a restaurant and let's say you won an award, I don't care, Michelin star or or a local award, whatever that is. The newspaper voted you best taco soup, whatever. So people know that. But the difference and the impact here is when I go in and eat, that experience is almost, if not more important than the award you got, because if it wasn't a good experience, you're just a award-winning crappy restaurant, right? So they both matter. So the recency effect is an issue of what happens now and the biggest thing that happens. And that's what branding is. And that's what it comes down to for any industry and any business.
Scott, along the same lines, maybe you could indulge the listeners on the story about the Ritz Carlton at Edmund Island.
This is Joshy.
My favorite one that I've told around the world. That it's the one where the Hearn family was at the Ritz Carlton in Florida, and they left their the kid left their stuffed giraffe and forgot it, and they flew back to Phoenix. And what happens when your kid loses their favorite thing? Your day is done. Like, it's just like, it's going to be just traumatic. And so the father did what any good father would do, and he lied to his son. And he said that Josh, he's on an extended vacation. And the dad panics and calls the Ritz Carlton up, and they found him, which I thought was like the best part of the story originally. Like, that should be the end of the story. They found him. Like, that's amazing, because you never get anything back if you lose something in a hotel. And not only did they find him, and not only did they overnight him back to the awaiting family, but they sent back photos of the extended vacation. They did a photo shoot with him, right? He's getting a massage. He's by the pool. There's a picture of all these stuffed animals at the bar hanging out. You have him working in loss prevention. He has an ID badge, and like, they overnighted it back to the family at no charge. And like, it's just like, what? And then the story blew up, and we loved it so much. It's now like the opening story. I give it every talk, and it's the opening story in the book we have of Unselling. And then I look at the audience. I'm like, how much does this cost the Ritz Carlton every time I tell it? And then I look at them. I'm like, exactly $5,000 every time I tell it. And they, of course, it doesn't cost $5,000. But my example. That's my example of word of mouth, which is basically, and there's no easier way to say it than, if you want word of mouth, you do things worth talking about. And that's what the story, and the key, and really the lesson from that story isn't about the giraffe. It isn't about the photo shoot. It's about who did it. The front desk clerk and somebody in the laundry that were the creators, were the authors of this story. An empowered front line changes everything. Your front line greatly impacts your bottom line on every level. And this happens to anything, especially ones, though, that have a disproportional amount of touch points with the customer base. And a lot of the times, those are people we hire without thinking much. Like, we hire warm body syndrome. Can you talk? Can you walk? Can you hold a tray? Can you do this? Then you're hired. And the problem is, hiring is almost one of the most important marketing things you can do. Right? They're the brand. They're the ambassador of the brand. That's the problem. Are we tolerating employees, or are we hiring the ones that make us look better? And Ritz Carlton's like that in everyone you go to, right? You just like, you think they're all high. Like, they're just so happy to see you. You show up, they're like, how you doing? I'm like, what's wrong with you? Why are you so happy to see me? And it's wonderful. And Disney's the same way. You pick those companies, and we know, and here's the thing, we pick those companies, you name Disney and Ritz Carlton and Zappos and Southwest, and we have all those, the golden rung of service-based companies. And people tell me, after I tell that story, sometimes they're like, yeah, well, that's Ritz Carlton. They're known for being great. And I look at them and I say, what? Why aren't you? Like, why aren't you known for being that? Because the only way they're known that is because they do it.
Yeah, and I think it's so many valuable points that you touched on. One that I want to point out is what that employer will tolerate with their employees, number one. Number two, how they empower them and give them either creative license to go above and beyond, do the plus one. And along those same lines, you talk about something that I think would hit home with a lot of people. There's a lot of people that want to go, quote, viral, and they want to get the news spread about them, but they forget one little thing. Can you talk about that?
Well, but that's about, you mean going viral, and they're not the ones that choose it, or the
yeah, they have to do something worth talking about. The end of the day. But
that's it, right? But that's the biggest. When I used to run the viral video company, people call me up with a video already made and say, "Can you make it go viral?" Like, I had some Harry Potter magic dust I could sprinkle on the thing, and off it went. And off you go, crappy video, million views. It doesn't work that way. That we, as the audience, dictate what goes viral. And going viral even changes now. Like, a video is not a video is not a video. And what I mean by that is, a video that went viral 10 years ago could go viral today. The issue is, we call this content context. how does it fit with the platform you're sharing it on? So a Facebook video has different constraints than a YouTube video. Facebook, majority of videos are watched with the sound off, and they're watched in a serendipity type of way, meaning I didn't ask for it. I didn't search for it. On YouTube, 95% of the time on YouTube, I'm watching the video I choose to watch, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So the video, as an example, I had my video go viral 2 months ago on the UnMarketing Facebook page, and it got 14 million views. And it's just a clip of me losing my mind about millennial bias on stage. And I say something like, that what we mean when we say millennials is people younger than us and we don't like you.
Yeah.
Like that's the whole thing. But here's the thing. I posted the video originally and I got about 250,000 views, which is great. It's a great number of views. But I didn't think it should have gone more. So I put title bars across the top and bottom and put a title on it. And it said what old people mean by millennials. And that stays there the whole time. So it stops you from scrolling for a second to say, oh, what is this guy talking about? Because people who know me, who follow me, who like the UnMarketing page, they'll stop and listen. But if you don't care. You're not going to stop unless the topic makes you stop. And with that 14 million views, you have to dig deeper, because out of that 14 million, only 5 million were views over 10 seconds. So the 14 million looks great. And Facebook counts a view as anything over 3 seconds, which is a vanity to me. It doesn't count. It's not a view. And out of that 5 million, 2.9 million of those 10-second or more views were with the sound on. The majority of videos on Facebook overall are watched with sound off. I mean, 85% of them. And what that means is it's not people stopping and watching a video and just watching it with no sound. It's like it's playing in their timeline, but they're not paying attention. So the metric that's important to me for my content was that 2.9 million who did watch it with sound over 10 seconds, not 14.6 million views or 35.8 million people, quote, reached. It doesn't mean anything. So we have to watch for that type of stuff. And that's the problem with viral is you have to define your metric that means viral. And Facebook gives you the analytics to see it. We just don't want to look at it. We're like, I got this many likes or this many views. I'm like, what? So what did it do? What does it do for your business? That video brought me 10,000 more views on the full keynote talk of that talk on YouTube. I like that metric, not 35.5 million people reached that I can't go to the bank and pay my mortgage with that.
And I think it also helps you to understand the state of marketing. If you would have just done that on YouTube or somewhere else, it wouldn't have seen the same kind of traction. But listening to the audience or listening to the marketplace and knowing how people are going to respond, and then tailoring the message to that is really one of the reasons why it was successful.
Right, and I think that. But the worth of one YouTube video is worth a lot more than one Facebook view. And that's where, again, it's down to that context. What do you want? Like, what are you trying to get out of this? And because the problem on Facebook is the EdgeRank algorithm, which is what decides what goes into your news feed anytime you log in. One of the big factors of that is time decay. So the older the post is, the less it's going to get served in the newsfeed. And I can show you the exact peak of the video and exactly when time decay kicked in, because it's a steep drop right when it says, okay, now it's getting too old. It's why we don't see videos from a year ago, even though they have 1 million or 100 million views.
And even if they're being shared a lot?
What's that?
Still, even if they're still being shared a lot?
Yeah, it's still because we're not going to give you, because when I click share, it doesn't go to all my friends, right? It goes to whatever Facebook dictates who will think it's relevant. And Facebook has a vested interest, and every business in the world has a vested interest in relevance. If I log into Facebook and see something, I'm like, this isn't relevant. I will not log in again after a while, after that keeps happening. So that's a huge part about that. Now, because if they just did it by popularity, then Chewbacca Mask Mom would still be the number one thing coming up in your feed.
Right.
And I love that video. I think it's phenomenal, but I don't want to keep seeing it. So we have to, that's their play. Their entire net worth is based on relevance, and they have to keep that up, which means that video that went nuts has got to go now, because it's not going even more nuts, and we have to take it aside.
When companies or brands are trying to create some sort of plan to connect with their audience, and we can even tilt it even toward millennials, what are some of the things that they should do in terms of trying to connect? And I want to flash back to something you said first to give it a little bit more context. You said prior to a talk that you go over, you do a conference call, and they say they want X, Y, and Z, and you almost end up doing the same thing because fundamentally humans kind of experience the same thing. Do you think we're in a situation where people are looking at millennials too much, and then we should really be creating strategies for the underlying human causes, and as opposed to just pointing to one demographic?
100%. We're using this demographic when we should be using the term like psychographic, right? That each person's an individual. That what people don't realize is when literally when they say millennials, they think it's just the young group. And millennials now, if you really want to debate it, is actually between 19 and 36. Are you telling me a 36-year-old has the same needs and wants and desires as a 19-year-old? I certainly didn't. It's a different world. And so the problem is we're substituting younger than us with the term millennial. And of course it's different. Every generation has looked down on the younger generation. There was no worse generation back in the day than my generation, right? Gen X, we were the worst, worst ever, right? We just didn't, us with our grunge music, right? We're just that means you're just not clean, and your internets and all these things and your fancy animated PowerPoints, and I want to go back to
and here's your latchkey.
Right, exactly. And it was just like, so where I see the shift is not in generational, but in communication methodologies and how we prefer as customers to communicate. And that doesn't have a demographical kind of cutoff. Like my mom texts me, and she's 71, and she likes to text. And now she signs each line of text with mom at the end. Which is fine, but that comes down to I can bring it back into the food side of things too, where I can walk you in the roadmap of how I am not a millennial. So I'm Gen X, I'm 42, and I travel a lot. So I'm up for new food experiences wherever I go. And when Alison and I go somewhere, and she's a vegetarian and I'm a meatitarian, and so we want to find a place that works for both of us. And I use Yelp and I use OpenTable, and that's my thing. And you decide what happens after we come into that restaurant, but how I found you is important. That it's the discovery methodology and how we got to that point. And I also use TripAdvisor depending on where I'm going. And the thing is how do we come to that? There are people who are 55 years old and we use Yelp. There are people who are 18 and don't use Yelp. That's the point. Where is the majority of people going? How are they finding us? And a lot of times businesses never ask. They never ask. They just see people here. Well, they're here. Well, I want to know. I want to know where my money's going. Did anybody come in because of that billboard? Did anybody come in because of that Yellow Pages ad? Did anybody come in because of the Facebook ad campaign? And if I don't know where to put my money or my effort or my time. And that's a big deal. As an example, we were down last year. I had a gig in Florida, and Alison and I were both there, and we decided to go out for dinner, and we used Yelp. And we found this place ranked near the top, and it was an Italian place. And we're like, we trust Yelp. It's amazing how much we trust complete strangers. It's fascinating to me, right? Like the guy could be a serial killer, but he really loved the tacos at this place. So I'm going to give it a try. The guy's got to eat. So we went to this place, and it was early. Like we're talking like early bird special time. We were hungry. And I don't think there's anybody else in there. And if any other context, we would have kind of turned around because there was no proof. There's no social proof. There was nobody in there. But we walked in anyways, and they were happy. They're like, hey, come on in. And felt like it was an independent little Italian joint. And so we sat there, and the guy was wonderful, and the waiter was, great. And we could see the cook behind it cooking. And I got fresh homemade gnocchi, and Alison got salmon and stuff, and I got we had the antipasto and all these things, and the best tiramisu I've ever had in my life. And so I did the thing that I always said I wouldn't do. I took pictures of my food, and then I went to Yelp, and I, in real time, sitting at the table, gave them a 5-star review. And I thought it was amazing. And I thought that was it. And then the waiter brought the bill over, and he looks at me and goes, "Hey, Scott." I'm like, "How do you know my name? What's going on here?" He's like, "I just wanted to thank you for your review on Yelp. That means a lot to a small business like us. Thank you." And I'm like, what just happened here?
Wow.
I just posted it. And so it turns out our server is the co-owner of the restaurant. And it was just before the servers came in because it was early. So he was doing it. And the other co-owner was the chef behind it making the food. And he has Yelp for Business on his phone. And when a review comes up, it buzzes. And he walked over and addressed it, said, "Thank you so much." And I thought that was awesome. And that was killer. And, we're not millennials. We're not the young kids coming in and anything else. We're customers. And as soon as you try to put those customers in a box, then we make assumptions. And when we make assumptions, we start going down a very, very bumpy road. Because then we start assuming what they want. I'm all for data. I'm all for data and finding our customer profiles and stuff, but we just need to be careful. Because I don't look like somebody who likes fine food. I don't look like somebody who loves high-end shopping. I look borderline homeless. But we shop and eat at the best places in Vegas. We go to Tiffany's and we go to Louis and we go to all the places, and I love it. And I love buying Alison things, and I love eating at the best restaurants we can find. But if you judge that, and here's the thing, we do most of our high-end shopping in Vegas, and we go to New York, and we go to Chicago. And one of the luxuries of doing what I do is we get to travel, but we only spend the money usually in Vegas because you're treated differently in Vegas at restaurants and stores than you are in New York, in Manhattan or Chicago or even Toronto. If you walk into a store on Fifth Avenue looking like me, you may not actually get in the store. And if you are, they're trying to get the security will be the only person helping you. But in Vegas, anybody can have money. And we are treated like royalty there. And that's what you have to realize. And I've done talks to these brands afterwards. I'm like, I undercover shopped your store. And everybody's like, uh-oh. And they know what happened. And that's a big deal because that's where the money's going. And we never blame ourselves, by the way. We never blame ourselves for a drop in business or we lost because, we weren't good at what we do. We always blame something or somebody else. We blame Amazon for our lack of retail sales. And we blame Uber Eats for our restaurant not having many people dining in. And I know they do have impact, but we sometimes have to look in the mirror and saying, is it me? Or is it the people I've hired? Because we can control those things. We can do something about those things. And yet we don't.
Scott, you wrote the UnMarketing book about 6.5 years ago. And over the past fall, there was a new version that came out with the subtitle, "Everything has changed and nothing is different." Can you elaborate on maybe some of the changes and what's actually not different?
Yeah, the great thing about UnMarketing, the first one that came out, put me on the map and sold really well. And the problem with it is it kept selling. So people in 2015 are tweeting me saying, "Hey, Scott, I just read UnMarketing. I'm here on Twitter. What's up?" And I'm like, I'm not here as much anymore. So when you write a book, on paper, it's the day it comes out, it's outdated. So that's a problem when you speak about marketing and technology and social media, because that stuff changes. So we wanted to have a way of still having the core part of UnMarketing in there, because that's what really resonates with us and with the readers, but yet updating it. So we took out, I think, 6 chapters. We put in 5 or 6 new ones, and then we added like an addendum to the end of most chapters, which was we kept them intact. And at the end, we kind of did this postscript, like, hey, here's the updated thought about this. And the platforms have changed, right? So Twitter now in 2017 is different than 2008 when I joined, and it's a much more voyeuristic platform. It's much more listening and reading what celebrities and kind of bananas presidents say. And then, it goes, we watch a lot and we broadcast and we automate and we sync Instagram photos to it. And there's not a lot of listening and conversations happening. And then, Facebook now is certainly a different beast. We're at 1.8 billion active users on Facebook, not users, active, which means logged in at least once a month, which is insane, and then Snapchat and Instagram, and those parts didn't really exist. And this whole private social media thing, which is, Snapchat one-to-one messaging and stuff like that, was not a factor then. So those all shift, but our own wants and needs and desires as humans haven't. We want what we want, the thing we paid for when we want it. And that's never changed. And, that good customer service is still rare. And a lot of times good businesses are rare too. So the tools shift, and they always will shift, and they'll always change. We're always in this constant state of change now, as opposed to 10, 15 years ago. But what hasn't changed is that, the biggest part is what we get mad when we get screwed over. But one of the big changes now is we can let the world know. And that puts a lot of people on notice about it's not the same anymore. We can't just screw a customer over and let them just vent on their own, because it'll reach farther than any ad we ever put out, any apology we ever put out. It just flies.
And speaking of all these different channels, I feel like there's some companies, some brands, some entrepreneurs that struggle to narrow down which ones to use or to create some sort of just thought out plan. I feel like they just spray their message everywhere. Do you have advice for individuals that are trying to come up with some sort of strategic approach to figure out what are the channels that they're going to use, whether it's going to be advertising channels, digital or analog, if you will? Do you have any advice relating to that?
Yeah, well, it's overwhelming. The amount of choice is overwhelming, even for me. And I don't have a job. Like I don't work, and my only job is to stay on top of all these things, and I can't do it. So, good luck. Somebody who needs to.
Well, that's the podcast, everybody. We appreciate it.
Yeah, right. Thank you very much. Thanks. You're screwed. Take care. No, but there's ways, and I think it's just I still do it, which is I just call it platforming, where I'll pick a platform to focus for, and I don't mean for a week. I mean like 6 months to a year, and that's what I'll stay on. And there's two kind of qualifiers to figure out where you're going to go, which is where are your customers and what are you good at? So if you're good at interaction with customers, and if you don't have a lot of time, the interaction is not a good thing to do an uptake on. You don't want to set the tone like I'm here on Twitter 24/7, and then you take 3 days to answer. It's actually worse than not being there. But if you think, well, you know what, my business is based on visual, so then okay, well then we're looking at Instagram. Right. If my business is interactive, then, Twitter is still a place to talk about that. If it's more of, a place that the community knows, so I got some good Facebook hooks to that. But we need to pick some of them, and we need to pick, where are my customer base? Where is it going to work? Or am I going to focus on, reviews that have been left and making sure I'm on top of those? Or, AdWords or Facebook ads, or, where are those going to be that whatever it is, we have the ability today versus 20 years ago to test and then fix. So if you put out ads on Google and they're not working, you can halt it 3 hours later. It's not like a 6-month ad spend commitment on a billboard. I like those ones where I like to have a business spend where I can, if it doesn't work, spend somewhere else. Right? I don't like the other parts. I don't like the let's spend money and hope, and let's spend the whole budget and hope. I want to know in a week if it's working, and if it's not, I can shift it. I can change it. And again, the platforms, whatever it is, you don't want to open for business on every platform and then not have the door unlocked when everybody's talking to you. That doesn't mean you can't listen to what the chatter is happening on the different platforms, but there's a lot of tools out there probably you can use to keep an ear to the ground. Even at the end of the day, if you have an outside company do it and send you a report at the end of the day, the problem is things like Twitter and stuff, it's like real time. So you can't get a weekly report and somebody complained about the air conditioning level in the restaurant 5 days ago. Not going to help you. It's going to make it worse if you reply to it. So you got to pick your preference, right? I don't want everybody doing live video. I don't want everybody doing photos. I want what do you think is good for you and your business? What are you good at? Or do you have somebody that could do that? And sometimes there's these hidden gems at your company. Maybe one of your servers at a restaurant really loves photography, and you could take advantage of that. You could let them use their passion, and how it helps your business. Or you work at an accounting firm and somebody's a really good writer. Well, you can look, but you only find those things out when you know your people.
Then maybe kind of keeping an eye on the horizon. I know, like for you back in 07, 08, when you joined Twitter, it wasn't as big as a deal or as big as it is now. And as a result, you're able to grow and scale it in ways you probably wouldn't be able to if you're creating now.
Oh, a huge difference. And I didn't know going on Twitter that it would end up, 5 books and meeting Alison and, taking over the world. But I just knew that I had to focus and try. And when I was January 09 is when I realized I really focused on Twitter for a month. I wasn't going to I'm going to be the Twitter guy. It was, I'm going to give this platform 30 days, but I'm going to really try and see so I can exhaust it. And if it doesn't work, I can say I tried and it wasn't working, but I need to know. And I tweeted 7,000 times in that month and say it worked. It's, sitting here right now. We call this, we bought this house that I'm sitting in right now almost 2 years ago. And we're it's the house that we in Twitter built. We're sitting in it. It started everything. So but that was back to the original question from today, which having confidence. And I knew I had the voice and the ability, but I just have to find the right platform.
Well, in wrapping up a little bit here, Scott, could you talk a little bit about the new book you have that's coming out in the fall, UnBranding, and how that's going to be played out?
Yeah, it's UnBranding, the 100 branding stories in the age of disruption. So it's going to be 100 stories that crossed our page, our path, our microphones. And we thought, big companies, small companies, good and bad examples of kind of just ways that things are changing with companies right now and how they handled it and what you can learn from it. And so it's like an anthology of the good and bad and the ugly of branding. And we the third installment, when coming out. When I originally picked the name UnMarketing for the company, I thought it would look good on a book cover. And I'm like, yeah, it does. Nice. And then now we have so we looked at the unbox set. Eventually we'll have the trilogy, UnBranding, Unselling, UnMarketing. So
nice.
It's going to be fun. It's written the way we always write it. Short chapters, funny, sarcastic, but also there's lessons, there's takeaways for it. So yeah, October 2017.
And between now and then, you can catch Scott and his wife, Alison, on the UnPodcast.
The business show for the Fed Up every Wednesday.
That's right. Something I always look forward to.
Thank you, man.
Well, Sean, do you have anything else to add before we kind of wrap things up here in a minute?
That's it. What's on the horizon for you outside of the book? Anything else that you have going on, or anything that you want to leave us with for the audience?
Planes, trains, and automobiles. That's what I got coming up. All different places and sights and sounds. And yeah, it's always fun. Always fun to get in front of audiences, and I love it. And I can't wait to do the next gig.
Very cool.
Outstanding.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Scott. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, gentlemen. Anytime.
Take care. So that was our conversation with Scott Stratten. Good stuff, entertaining. Sean, what you got?
He's a funny dude. I like him. I feel like I need to fly to his next speech and buy him a beer or tequila. I think I just want to down a bottle of tequila with him and just see what comes out.
For sure, man.
Yeah, he's a funny guy. There's a lot of takeaways for me that I think that are valuable to a lot of people, a lot of our audience. But one in particular was, I'll paraphrase, but essentially growing slowly to ensure that you've got systems in place before you have a ton of customers come your way. I think that's an underappreciated point that some either entrepreneurs or businesses when they're starting out, they should maybe kind of change that perspective. I know that everybody wants to just have this flood of customers, but the question is, can you handle them if they come? Because if they come and you can't handle it, you know what? That's going to be a lot of negative press, a lot of negative word of mouth that's getting out there, and it just could set you back even further. So I think that was a really good one for me. Another one was looking at psychographics versus demographics when we were talking about millennial generation. I think a lot of generations, or all the generations combined, have certain psychographics that relate to them, and then as you go to certain generations, they've got key psychographics. I think that was another point that really stood out to me, something I'm going to actually look at a little differently. And then a third one for me was content context. When you're looking at different channels, whether it's advertising channels or social media platforms, ensuring that you have the right context with the content that you're putting out there on that platform or on that channel. So I think that was very, very key and something that people should think about. And even furthermore, before they just spray their message out to every single channel, really looking at one or two that align with their strengths and just really dominating those, and then maybe moving on to the next one. So those were a couple of my takeaways that I had. What about you?
Yeah, and just to kind of piggyback on that, I think you talked about aligning your strengths, like you just mentioned. And so if you're good with photography or if you're good with writing, finding platforms where you can really focus your energy on doing those things versus, like you said, just spraying it everywhere, hoping it works. And then also, making sure that your customers are there. If you do a bunch of work and put a bunch of energy into something and your customers aren't even there, then it's not going to have a whole lot of ROI, so to speak. For me also, I think, we were talking about the Ritz Carlton, people, you say, well, yeah, that's the Ritz Carlton though. And they're known for that kind of stuff. And his response is, well, why aren't you? And I think a lot of us forget that it really is kind of up to us. Like if you want to be, an elite player, if you want to be known for, the best food or the best customer service or the best whatever it is, you have to actually do the work and perform and become that. And that's how you get known for that. It doesn't just happen because you wave some magic wand and it comes into fruition, but it actually comes from the work that you put in. So I love that. That was for me a great conversation. I know I'll go back and probably listen to it a couple times to get some insights, get a few laughs, and it was really awesome to connect with Scott. And so if you want to connect with Scott, you can connect with him at UnMarketing. He's got 175,000 followers on Twitter, and his two thumbs type every single tweet that he puts out. His website is UnMarketing, UnMarketing.com, and keep an eye out for his new book coming up. And with that, we'll leave you with one kind of final parting quote from Scott himself, which is, if you believe business is built on relationships, make building them your business. And with that, we're signing off.